NFL Week 11 is here, and we're breaking down everything you need to know. We've got the free bet of the week, injury watch, stock up, stock down, DraftKings Player of the Slate, and our primetime preview with a prop you do not want to miss. Let's jump in.
The time is now for the Dr. Bob Sports Podcast. I am Tanner. I am our head of analytics, and I'm in my 9th year working alongside Bob, originating our NFL and college basketball bets. And today, as always, I'm joined by our digital media specialist, Grant. Happy Flamus Week to you.
Happy Flamus Week. I'm so fired up to see our boy get his first start of the season.
Yeah, and I mean, Jameis is 6.7 yards per pass play on his career. You look at the Giants this season, they're at 5.9 yards per pass play. And now the Giants without Neighbors do not have the same receiver quality that Jameis has had throughout his career, but the offensive line is better than what Jameis has had throughout his career. The Giants are 6th in pass blocking efficiency this season, so I think Jameis is going to get pretty close to his career average production on Sunday. I'm not making a major upgrade to New York's offense yet, just because we haven't seen him in this system, but I think a lot of us have suspected all year long that Jameis has been the best of the 3 quarterbacks in that room.
Definitely. And quarterback is not the only major change for New York this week, as the Giants are 2-8 for the 3rd consecutive season. So they fired head coach Brian Daboll, and they're going with Mike Kafka as the interim head coach.
Yeah, and teams in their first game with an interim head coach are 16-7 against the spread in the last decade, because it kind of acts as an emotional reset for the locker room. New coaches generally deploy subtle scheme tweaks that haven't been captured on film yet. So I like Jameis and Kafka in this spot on Sunday.
I'm so pumped up to watch our guy, but let's shift over to our first segment here. We've got the free bet of the week, and you are 28-17-1 on podcast sides and totals dating back to 2023 after both underdogs in your teaser won outright last week.
Yep, and this week we are going with a total in Jacksonville. We're going to take the Chargers Jaguars under 44. We talked a little bit about this situation in last week's primetime preview, but it's getting really dire on the Los Angeles offensive line without Joe Alt. They were already without Rashawn Slater, and backup Austin DeCoulis surrendered 5 pressures last week. And the other backup, Trey Pipkins, ranks 8th worst in pass blocking efficiency on true sets.
Yeah, and Herbert's 2.21 second time to throw against the Steelers was the fastest of his career, and this shorthanded offensive line is completely handicapping this offense.
And that was kind of hidden last week as the Chargers ended with 25 points in that game, but they averaged just 4.6 yards per play. The Chargers are a completely different team without Alt on the field, as we discussed. The Jaguars have the personnel to exploit that, because 2 of the Jaguars' best players are their edge defenders in Josh Hines-Allen and Trayvon Walker. They've combined for 66 pressures this season. And then Eric Armstead on the inside has been great for the Jaguars, and he's going to line up against Mekhi Becton, who ranks 6th worst in pass blocking efficiency among guards. So I like the Jaguars' defensive line to exploit the Chargers' weak offensive line. And then Justin Herbert throws more to his wide receivers than any quarterback in the NFL, and the Jaguars defense is conceding a league low 0.03 EPA per target to opposing wide receivers.
All right, well, shifting to Jacksonville's offense, they traded for Jacoby Myers at the deadline, and he averaged 2.56 yards per route run in his first game. And Trevor Lawrence could also benefit from possibly getting back wide receiver Brian Thomas and tight end Brenton Strange, who had a 67% success rate in the first 5 weeks of the season before he landed on the IR.
Yeah, so a little bit of good news for Jacksonville personnel-wise, but this Chargers defense, very zone-heavy, very they don't use a blitz a lot, which is kind of like what the Jaguars saw with the Texans last week that kind of stifled Trevor Lawrence. So just matchup wise, this game is trending under, and we also the model makes this game 42.5, 43. So I think that's where this price should be. And we'll take under 44 for our free bet of the week.
All right, well, let's shift over to our next segment here. We've got the injury watch, and the Steelers have a team total of 27.5 this week because Cincinnati's defense has been that bad, and Trey Hendrickson will be out for another week, and the Bengals defense is allowing 5.7 yards per play and 0.06 EPA per play with Trey Hendrickson on the field, compared to 7 yards per play and 0.34 EPA per play with him off the field.
Yeah, so you extrapolate those splits that you just said to a full game, that implies that Trey Hendrickson has been worth 16.7 points per game by EPA. And more conservatively, by yards per play, he's been worth 5.7 points per game. So you look at it, to get to this number, you mentioned the Steelers team total, but to get the Steelers to be this much of a favorite and the total of the game to be this high, a divisional game in Pittsburgh in November, you would need to think Trey Hendrickson is worth, at least 3 points, maybe 4 points. But I mean, you've seen he's been worth more than that so far. So I'm not willing to, make a major claim in any direction. It's certainly unlikely for an NFL player to be worth that much that isn't a quarterback, but we've seen it so far this season. So that's definitely one of the biggest injuries in the NFL to watch.
All right, well, looking at the 49ers, they are getting healthier while the Cardinals are going in the other direction. But Brock Purdy should be under center this week, which is going to upgrade the offense. And they also will likely be getting back Ricky Pearsall, who is averaging 2.29 yards per route run, while San Francisco's other wide receivers, Jawan Jennings, Kendrick Bourne, and Demarcus Robinson, have combined for 1.45 yards per route run.
Yeah, and you mentioned Arizona going in the other direction there because they're going to be without cornerback Will Johnson, who's allowing 0.42 yards per cover snap, fewer than Denzel Burke. And then they're also going to be without wide receiver Marvin Harrison. He's got an appendectomy. He's worth 1 point by our metrics. And Harrison is averaging 0.55 more EPA per target than Greg Dortch, who's likely going to get the targets in his absence.
Yeah, and the 49ers defense got back edge defender Bryce Huff last week, and he ranks 18th in pass rushing efficiency.
All right, well, moving over to the Madrid game, the Commanders will be without 2 starting cornerbacks, 3 starting defensive linemen, while the Dolphins are down 2 starters on the offensive line, Tyreek Hill, likely cornerback Rasul Douglas, and they traded away Jalen Phillips, who's 10th in pressure. So a lot of guys out on both teams in this Madrid game. Washington and Miami are both allowing a 47% success rate this season. Those defenses, I would say Miami has the edge here because of just the current personnel left on the field. But I think the Commanders' offense clearly has an edge. I mean, you look at it, Mariota is averaging 0.07 EPA per play this season, Tua averaging 0.02 EPA per play.
Yeah, Washington also has an advantage on the ground with a 44.6% rush success rate, which is 6th in the NFL, compared to Miami's 36.5% rush success rate, which is 26th in the NFL. But let's shift over to our next segment here. We've got stock up, stock down, and whose stock are you buying right now?
Chiefs offense. I mean, you look at it, Patrick Mahomes is averaging 0.30 EPA per play since week 7 when Rashee Rice came off the suspension. And now this will be the first game that Kansas City's offense will have all 11 starters on the field, with Josh Simmons coming back into the fold to limit Nick Bonito. I think the Chiefs offensive line is going to hold up really well against that Denver pass rush. You'll have Mahomes and Creed Humphrey calling out those Denver blitzes. Mahomes ranks 10th relatively versus the blitz this season, and he'll have time in the pocket to look downfield to exploit Denver backup cornerback Chris Abrams-Drain, who is surrendering 3.4 more yards per target than Pat Surtain, who's going to be out again this week.
Yeah, that offense has been scary lately, but whose stock are you going to be selling?
I think it's time to sell the Rams stock, and this is basically from a schematic standpoint. So Matthew Stafford's 20 touchdown passes versus the blitz are already more than all but 2 quarterbacks in a full season in the last decade. But the Seahawks are not going to fall into that trap. They rank 30th in blitz rate. The other thing that the Rams have been doing is deploying a ton of 13 personnel. They average 6.7 yards per play in 13 personnel against the 49ers. But the Seahawks have an answer there because you can't get the Seahawks out of nickel. That's one of the strengths of Mike Macdonald's system. He's able to defend the run out of nickel, and the Seahawks rank 6th relatively defending the pass against heavy personnel. Rams wide receivers Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams have accounted for over half of the team's targets, but the Seahawks rank 4th in success rate allowed to opposing wide receivers. I think the Seahawks defense is built to stop the Rams offense, and the Rams will be slowed down finally on Sunday.
The Seahawks have been absolutely cooking lately, so that'll be a good game to watch. But let's head over to our next segment here. We've got the DraftKings Player of the Slate, and who are you putting in your lineups on Sunday?
I'm going to put Caleb Williams again. He's listed here at 5,900.
Yeah, I think that worked out for you last time you picked him for the player of the slate in week 3. I mean, he went off for 29 DraftKings points.
And I like his matchup again this week. The Bears' offensive line has been really solid with all those offseason additions, ranking 4th in pass blocking efficiency. I think they're going to slow down this Vikings pass rush, particularly on the interior.
Yeah, I mean, Bears 4-time All-Pro guard Joe Thuney has allowed pressure on 1.9% of pass plays this season, tying for the best rate of his career, and the Vikings pass rush is taking a hit, likely without Jonathan Grenard this week. He has 36 pressures, which is 15th in the NFL.
And the Vikings get all that pressure with their league-high 60% blitz rate, but the Bears are averaging 14% more yards per attempt against the blitz this season than a standard pass rush. That's 3rd relatively in the NFL, and Ben Johnson's offense is better against too high safeties due to his ability to exploit lighter boxes and attack those underneath zones. The Bears rank 5th relatively against middle field open coverages, and the Vikings lead the NFL with a 69% middle field open coverage rate.
I love it. Well, let's shift over to our next segment here. We've got the weather of the week, and what are you seeing out there?
Looking like sustained winds of 20 miles per hour in Cleveland on Sunday, making this the windiest game of the season. It's going to be nearly impossible for Cleveland's passing attack because Dylan Gabriel has the weakest arm of any starter in the NFL. Gabriel is averaging just 6.1 air yards per attempt. That's the 3rd lowest, and he has a negative 5% completion percentage versus expectation.
Yeah, you can always count on Cleveland to have the bad weather this time of year, but let's shift over to our primetime preview, and we have the Eagles as favorites over Detroit.
Detroit coming off that game with a 59% success rate with Dan Campbell taking over, calling the plays, but Campbell's feeling the need to make the change signals more of an underlying problem to me rather than a buy signal based off of last week. Because you look at it, the Commanders went into that Lions game without 4 starters on defense. Then Deron Payne got ejected. Then they lost 2 cornerbacks in Trey Amos and Jonathan Jones. It was a pretty convenient time for Dan Campbell to say to John Morton, you know what? I'll take over calling the plays this week. And I think, I don't think Dan Campbell is on the same level as Ben Johnson. I would expect the Lions offense to continue being about 2% in success rate worse than they were last season. That's going to start this week because it's going to be a much different matchup in this game. They're going to be going against the league's top defense by our ratings after the Eagles traded for Jalen Phillips and Michael Carter at the deadline.
Yeah, I mean, Jordan Love was pressured on 40.5% of his dropbacks against the Eagles on Monday night, and their offense only averaged 3.9 yards per play.
Yeah, and you look at it, Dan Campbell's been trying to get the ball to Jameson Williams more. He's been trying to get the ball to Sam Laporta, who's 4th in yards per route run among tight ends. But the Eagles are conceding a league-low 38% success rate to opposing tight ends.
All right, well, what are you seeing for the Eagles offense versus the Lions defense? Do you think A.J. Brown's going to get the ball after all his shenanigans?
I mean, it's possible. I mean, this week, the Lions run a ton of man coverage, which is kind of the bread and butter for those deep go routes along the sideline for A.J. Brown. Jalen Hurts is averaging 13% more yards per attempt against man coverage compared to zone this season. That's 2nd relatively in the NFL.
All right, well, before we go, let's do our primetime prop. And you are 30-23 on podcast props dating back to 2023, but where do you want to go for this one?
This week, I'm taking Amon-Ra St. Brown under 75.5 receiving yards. And this is just due to that one-on-one matchup he's going to have on the inside against Cooper DeJean, who, in my eyes, is the best nickelback in the NFL, allowing just 0.66 yards per cover snap in the slot. We speculated last week that DeJean might move to the outside, but they did not move him out there after trading for Michael Carter, and they're unlikely to now because they know they need to shut down Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Yeah, I mean, Jameson Williams had a season-high usage last week as Dan Campbell is trying to get him the ball more, and Campbell's also a former tight end, so I could see the offense shifting slightly towards JMO and Laporta with him calling plays, but that will wrap it up for our Week 11 preview. If you're looking for more content, make sure to head over to drbobsports.com where you'll find Tanner's NFL analysis as well as Bob's college football write-ups. And you can also find our college basketball service that has plays releasing every day until the end of March. So we'll see you guys back next Friday for Week 12.